Hello everyone, this is Major Grin, and I just watched the first two episodes of Star Trek Discovery, and it wasn't as bad as I feared it would be. It does have some redeeming elements, but there are a whole bunch of problems which I'm going to analyze, so this will be an extremely nitpicking review with spoilers, so be warned, but I will start with the positive things. I will start with things that I actually liked. The writing in this show wasn't that bad, like the main story I think was constructed well. Like, if not for the visual stuff that I'm going to complain about, it could have been a nice opening for a TV series, even though it can be argued that it's not in the Star Trek style to have a series about a war at all, so that's another argument. I really enjoyed the darker Star Trek episodes. I really loved the Dominion War in Deep Space Nine. I loved the Xindi story arc. I loved some of the darker episodes in Voyager, like Year of Hell, and so I am actually a fan of stories like that, and so it's an interesting question if it's a good idea for the whole series to be like this. And so I kind of liked the main story actually, like the whole setup of how the Klingon War started. I think there were a lot of neat things in it. Now the problem is, of course, as a prequel we already know how it's all going to end, so we know the Federation will win. We know how everything will end, so it makes it less interesting. The stakes are not as high as they would be if it was a brand new show in which anything can happen. So the storytelling is very limited because it's a prequel. And that's why I think this show would actually be better off as a reboot. It would have been better off if it was actually set in the Kelvin timeline. And it would also free it from any continuity problems. And the funny thing is that visually they made it like the new reboot movies anyway, so if they do that, why not just set it in that new timeline? That would have solved so many problems. Now I know there are some reasons for it, because the copyright of Star Trek is kind of split between Paramount and CBS, and that's probably the reason for some of this mess, because it's now obvious that this series cannot possibly tie well with the original TV series. It doesn't fit visually, it doesn't fit in the story, the Klingons are totally different. But before I get to all of that, let me review this series on its own merit without looking at all the other series. So first of all, we've seen some aliens which are not humanoid, which is always welcome. The problem is that these aliens were basically just there, they didn't have any actual story, they will not be part of the story, so they were just kind of a one-time thing. So if they will not actually be part of the plot in any way, then it was all totally meaningless to try to impress the viewers basically. But it remains to be seen if it's a one-time thing or if aliens like that will keep appearing in this series, which I personally would appreciate. I always like to see stranger aliens. Now as for the Klingons, they do still have a lot of the same elements, but I personally prefer the older TNG era Klingons much more. So obviously I didn't like the Klingon reimagining, however I did like some of their sets. The internal sets of their ships did look kind of cool, so I give them points to that. A lot of elaborate sets. But another problem I think is because they had the Klingons only talking their own language all the time and we had to read subtitles in English, that was kind of distracting, and so I couldn't really pay attention to the visuals, to the sets, to the beauty of the sets. And I guess they were going for more realism. They wanted the Klingons to talk in their own language. But you know, in all the Star Trek shows, like half the time, most of the time, they were just talking English with some Klingon words. I think it would have been better, especially because they had so much screen time. It was really getting annoying to read the subtitles. And I don't think anyone would complain. Like, everybody can assume that we as the audience, we have universal translators, just like the Starfleet officers, and we can understand the Klingons and hear them in English even though they're talking in their own language. And if they spoke English, we could have really looked at all the sets and so on, because the Klingon sets were pretty good, I think. However, the Starfleet sets were pretty terrible. Just as I said before when I saw it in the trailer, all the Starfleet internal sets looked terrible. In my opinion, I really hated the design. Horrible. I mean, everything was very monotone, one color, everything was dark. And the uniforms also terrible in my opinion. Probably the worst Starfleet uniforms of all time in my opinion. All the uniforms were the same exact color, they all looked the same, all of them dark blue. The only ones I did like were of the medical personnel who wore white uniforms. So when I saw that, I was so happy to see a fresh uniform which was not the same as all the others. So at least they had some little variety in there. But other than that, all the uniforms look terrible, and the sets also look pretty terrible. Also, the way the camera moves in this show is just completely terrible. The camera is constantly at weird angles, it flies around the characters, there are lens flares everywhere. Again, I guess deliberately imitating the JJ style for some reason, even though he himself apologized for it. He himself said he overdid it, and yet they do it in the show for some reason. And as I said, everything on the ship is dark and blue, and it lacks color. And at the same time, we have these bright lens flares all the time, so it was really annoying visually, in my opinion. And everything is tilted all the time. Whenever they show just two people talking, the camera is not straight, instead it's tilted, or it rotates around the characters, sometimes 360 degrees around the characters as they speak. So it's just terrible, it just causes motion sickness. I don't know what the hell they're thinking. The only times that it did work was in the space scenes. When she went out into space, the camera was showing her upside down and flying around and stuff. That was okay because it's in space. That's how it should look. Like, it makes you feel as if you're also out in space. Just like the movie Gravity did, in which you really felt as if you're in there. So that was fine. The space scenes were fine that way because it makes it feel more realistic in space. And I always made fun of Star Trek for being unrealistic in that way. Like, Star Trek always showed as if there is up and down in space. However, internally, when they show the inside of the ship, it's just completely pointless. I see no reason to film it like that. Like, if someone is walking around the corridor, the camera follows him as if it's flying around, as if it's floating, changing angles, and just two people talking, the camera has to be tilted, or it has to rotate around the characters. It was just super annoying. I was really annoyed at that. And I'm not saying the camera has to be stable all the time, like, it's fine to do strange things once in a while, but I think the eyes need a break once in a while. Like, for most of the show, just keep the camera straight. And this really reminds me of Stargate Universe, which also tried to do this kind of style as a gimmick. Like, I guess to try to make it realistic, to make us feel like it's a reality show, as if someone is filming it all with a handheld camera, like a point of view kind of thing. It feels like a gimmick. It feels like they're just trying to make it look more edgy and gritty and realistic, but it's really just annoying. And again, I would be fine with that if it's used once in a while for some establishing shot or in the space shots. But all the internal sets, it's bad enough that the sets themselves look so terrible, but they also film everything tilted and the camera keeps moving around and all the lens flares appearing all the time, so it's just, it's terrible in my opinion. The internal sets of the Starfleet ships, it just looks awful. Now let me talk about the characters. Now, I didn't hate any of the characters, but overall I didn't really like any of them. The main one, Michael, is kind of a Mary Sue type of character. Like, she's supposed to be good at everything and she's the main focus of the show. And so it feels more like a superhero show rather than a show about a team effort. Like all the other Star Trek shows and most shows in general, they always have a team of characters and each one contributes something that he's good at. And yet in this show it feels like only one character is developed, only one character is good at everything, and all the others are just side characters basically. Also, the exotic alien in this show, I forgot his name, but he was really annoying in my opinion. He's just an annoying coward. And he really reminds me of Sheldon from Big Bang Theory for some reason. Also, when he talks, he keeps making annoying alien noises all the time, and so he really got annoying really fast in my opinion. And his most annoying trait is his cowardice. He says they should retreat all the time, so he's basically a coward. And I wonder, how did he even get accepted into Starfleet Academy? Don't they have a psych test that checks to see if you can face your greatest fear? Like, he's a total wimp, he's a total coward in this show. But at least they didn't make him psychic. I was really afraid when I heard his line in the trailer. He had that line, "I can sense the coming of death," and so I kind of assumed that he must have some kind of psychic power, which seemed really dumb, like a power to sense death, like what? But it turns out he's not a psychic, he's just a paranoid coward. So he's just scared all the time of everything. As for the Vulcan guy, who apparently is Sarek, the same guy who is the father of Spock, and apparently Michael was his adoptive human daughter, so she is Spock's adoptive sister, and yet he never mentioned her. And it's really quite a coincidence that Sarek had a fetish for humans, like he was married to a human twice, and he adopted a human daughter. And why not just make him a different Vulcan character? Why make him Sarek? Like, it makes the whole universe seem smaller when you connect everything too much like this. It seems pointless and just annoying for no reason. Like, they wanted to piss off the Star Trek fans, and I think they changed the line he had in the trailer. Like, originally he said, "Your tongue is too human," which sounded really kind of racist, and I complained about that, but in the actual episode he says, "Your human tongue is not the problem, your heart is." And it's not what he said in the original footage, so I wonder if they changed it in the last moment to not make him sound like such an a-hole as he did in the original footage. And another continuity problems with the Vulcans, when she asked Sarek for help, she asked him how the Vulcans made relations with the Klingons, and it really didn't make sense, because aren't the Vulcans part of the Federation at this time? So wouldn't the Federation know all of this? Wouldn't Vulcans share their knowledge of the Klingons and their relationships with the Klingons? Why didn't they share it with Starfleet anyway? So it made no sense at all. Why did he have to tell Michael this as if it's some big secret that no one else knows? And the character of Michael, they really made her like totally reckless, totally almost stupid. Like first she leaves that decontamination chamber even though apparently that endangered her own life. And she did that just because she had to tell the captain something, but why couldn't she just contact the captain by the comm? Like it made no sense for her to behave in this way when there were other alternatives. I mean, they do have internal ship's communications, right? So why did she have to personally come to see her on the bridge when she needs this life-saving treatment? It made no sense, and it made her look like totally reckless for no reason. And so I don't think I liked any of the characters, honestly. Also, she volunteered to go explore that asteroid belt to find a thingy, which apparently they couldn't see with their sensors, but they could see with a normal telescope. So an old-fashioned telescope is more superior than their advanced technology. It seemed totally stupid in my opinion, like they don't have any kind of backup cameras or something, like they cannot see the outside without their normal sensor array. Like it makes absolutely no sense. Also, it's funny that they are a science vessel, yet apparently they don't have unmanned probes that they can send. I mean, she had to go in a spacesuit herself to look at it, so I guess they don't actually have probes like all the other shows to look at something from afar without risking someone. Also, it's funny how the spacesuit is much more advanced than the ones we've seen in First Contact, which did not have thrusters, they only had magnetic boots and that's it. Even though it's more of the fault of First Contact, like 24th century, they really should have had much more advanced spacesuits. I was kind of surprised that very early on she actually meets that Klingon in space. I actually expected it to be like the final boss fight in the end of the episode or something, and yet they did it early on. However, it was very disappointing that it was not an actual fight, it was all like 1 second long. So that was kind of disappointing. I really expected them to have an actual fight, and yet it was just 1 second long. And let me now talk about the Klingon redesign. I think most people agree that this was a mistake. Like I would be fine with them making a small change to the Klingons, but not such a radical change. I mean, they look more like the Remans from Nemesis, or like orcs from Lord of the Rings. The only element of the Klingons is their forehead. Also, I think they took some inspiration from H.R. Giger. Some of the Klingons have xenomorph-like features. Some of the Klingons' heads are elongated, some of them have weird dents in their skin, and even their ships look kind of Gigerish. Especially this shot of the Klingon ship on a planet, and even the planet itself, all of this scene looks really like the derelict ship from Alien. So I think they took some inspiration from H.R. Giger for some of these designs. And there is some cool elements in it, like the internal sets, as I said, they look pretty good, I think. However, it's still a blatant disregard to continuity with all the other Trek shows. And I think that's the biggest problem that pisses off most of the fans. And you know, if there was some sort of explanation for all these changes, then it would have been forgivable. But there is none. And the sad thing is that they could have easily explained it. They actually said that there are different houses of Klingons, all of them fighting over control of the Empire. And so what they should have done is simply show that each of the houses looks very different. And that some of those houses would look like the TNG era Klingons, maybe some of them would look like the original series Klingons. Like we know that the virus that infected the Klingons in Enterprise only infected a few million of them, it didn't infect the whole species. And so maybe only a few million of them look like humans and the rest look like the Klingons we know from TNG. And maybe some minority look like the Klingons we see in this show. So I would have been fine with that explanation. So all they had to do is show that the other houses look different. I would have been fine with that. They had a scene in which they showed the holograms of the Klingons from the other houses. So all they had to do is show one of them as the TNG Klingon and another one of them looking like a human. Just show them in the background as side characters. I would have been fine with that. That would have explained away all the continuity problems. We would have simply assumed that these Klingons we see are simply of a specific house which looks like this. Like we would be free to assume that currently this house is the dominant one in the Empire, and so we see these kind of Klingons, and maybe later on in the series when these Klingons are defeated, maybe the other houses take control of the Empire, and maybe these weirder Klingons all get exiled to a separate planet. And since they are isolationists, they are xenophobes, maybe they will completely isolate themselves and never get involved in galactic affairs again, and that's why we never saw them later. And the other Klingons will rule the Klingon Empire later, and so that would neatly explain all the continuity problems. And it would have made perfect sense, I think. And you know, the Klingons' appearance varies between houses. We've seen that in TNG as well. Like the different families of Klingons have different looking foreheads. Like Worf's foreheads don't look the same as the ones in the Duras family, for example, or other families. Like each family of Klingons, each house had a very different physical look. And also the Klingon Empire is not just one planet. There actually many Klingons live on other planets. And so it would make sense for different Klingons to look differently. And they had the perfect opportunity to solve this continuity problem in this scene showing the other houses. And by the way, it's funny, they show that Starfleet also uses this holographic communication, and this really contradicts what we've seen in other Trek shows, because in Deep Space Nine they actually introduced this kind of holographic communication, and everybody acted as if it's a brand new technology. And they had to install a special panel for people to be able to appear as holograms and talk to each other on the bridge, and everybody acted as if it's a brand new technology that they're using for the first time. And do you remember how amazed Riker was when he first walked into the holodeck on the Enterprise D? Like it seemed like holograms were a brand new technology. In the original series we never saw Kirk using any holograms, and so this basically creates another continuity problem for no reason. Now the holograms we see, they do look much more primitive than the ones in TNG and DS9 because they are transparent, they're glitchy and all of that, but still they seem to be way too advanced for this era. Also, apparently whoever appears as a hologram is able to hear and see everything around him in 3D. Even when someone stands behind him and talks, he's able to hear it and turn around. And so apparently it's totally 3D holographic projection on his side as well. So it seems to be way too advanced. Also, when Sarek appeared as a hologram, he even sits on her table as a hologram. I mean, he is a hologram, so that table does not exist on his side. So that seems to indicate the holograms actually have some physicality. That the hologram of the table on his side apparently allows him to sit on it. So this is way too advanced for this time period. So this is once again creating continuity problems for no reason. Like it makes you wonder how come no one else in Starfleet ever used that kind of communication up until the 5th season of Deep Space Nine, when everybody thought it's so cool to have this new holographic communication. Another problem is with Vulcan telepathy. Sarek is able to contact Michael from 1,000 light years away. And in the Star Trek universe, telepathy was always limited by distance. And in one episode of TNG, when they met a Betazoid with a much higher than normal telepathic abilities, Troy was amazed that he was able to sense stuff from light years away. And so it was obvious that distance is a factor in telepathy. Now Vulcans do have telepathic powers, but not as great as Betazoids. They always had to have direct physical contact with a person to mind meld with them. Even though we once saw Sarek being in continued connection with Picard without touching him, but it was still all on the same ship. And yet apparently now Sarek is able to contact people from 1,000 light years away, so that's again kind of fishy. But you know, at least there is one thing that is still consistent in this show. The bridge consoles are still filled with explosives. So when the fighting started and the consoles started exploding, that kind of felt familiar. As for the main character, I think she's totally irredeemable after what she did. She basically physically attacked and incapacitated her captain and tried to commit mutiny, all because she disagreed with her orders, and those were the orders that the admiral gave, not just the captain. So she basically disobeyed orders, committed mutiny, and attacked her own captain just out of some belief that attacking the Klingons first would prevent the war. So I don't see how any captain could ever trust her again. So I guess they're setting her up as a kind of character similar to Ensign Rowe and Tom Paris. Both of them kind of did bad things and later redeemed themselves. So I guess they're setting her up as a kind of character who is on a redemption arc. I was worried they were going to just forgive her in Starfleet, but apparently they sentenced her to life in prison, which pleasantly surprised me. But she'll probably get out of that pretty soon and be back in Starfleet in no time because reasons. I guess because she's just so smart and talented that Starfleet cannot handle anything without her. So I guess they will have to release her from prison and put her back on duty just because she's so awesome. Which is really strange. Like I didn't see, like I guess she's kind of smart, she's a smart scientist, but really that's enough to put her out of prison? Like I don't even understand what was the whole point of her backstory of living on Vulcan, being almost Vulcan-like. Like, what's even the point of that? Like, I don't get it, but I guess we'll see. And by the way, the look of that court in the end, it looked like some kind of totalitarian society. It was almost like a Cardassian prison, you know, with bright lights aimed at your face without you being able to see your judge. It doesn't really feel like the enlightened Starfleet we come to know. It feels more like a fascistic society. So I guess the whole style of the show is kind of a more dark, gritty kind of Starfleet. And so I don't know how I feel about this show. Like, it doesn't really feel like Star Trek. And you know, I like the Dominion War arc in Deep Space Nine. I love the Xindi arc in Enterprise. But even during those story arcs, there was always comedic episodes. There was always light-hearted episodes. Deep Space Nine had a whole bunch of comedy episodes. Even during the Dominion War, they had the Ferengi episodes, all that stuff. So it was never like the whole series being dark. It was always kind of mixed together with fun, light-hearted episodes. So it remains to be seen if this show will do the same. Maybe some episodes will not be about the war, maybe it will be about something else. Hopefully some science fiction stories, because so far we didn't actually see any kind of science fiction element except the settings of it, but it didn't really have any science fiction story. It was only about this war with Klingons. So hopefully other episodes will be about other things that will actually have some kind of science fiction, maybe some comedy, and hopefully not just a dark war arc all the time. And you know, the spirit of Star Trek was never about war. Like, even though I like that, as I said, but the spirit of Star Trek is about exploration. It's about going to new places, discovering new things, and helping other planets make peaceful solutions to their problems, to their conflicts. So it was always very hopeful. It was always about helping people. It was about exploration. It's about science fiction. So it remains to be seen if the rest of the series will have those elements as well. And personally, I enjoyed the Orville much more. It was much more in the Star Trek style, at least visually speaking. So I think that was the correct style for a Star Trek show. So I'm not sure about this show. Maybe it will get better, so we'll see. So that's it for this review. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.